Man, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of EOS. It's 1090 Jake, man. I'm rocking with y'all and y'all rocking with me. For this video, I'm going to be speaking on the Surenos, Sir 13 within the Florida Department of Corrections. Now, being that I have a prison channel, I have bounced around and watched other prison channels to view their content and to try to understand the politics differences between the states or the coast. And Florida compared to out west, specifically California, is a whole nother world. Now with the Surenos inside of the Florida Department of Corrections, in my experience, they barely ever had numbers. I never saw more than like 6 of them on a compound together, versus in Cali, they're deep. And it's not that they're just deep, they're one of the biggest organizations and most dominant within the California Department of Corrections. But please don't be fooled by numbers, because numbers really don't mean anything. In Florida, they are still a very dominant and respected group within the prison system. In comparison to other gangs, they do not have the numbers. But in my experience, they treat each other differently than most other organizations. Now, the Hispanics, the Latinos in Florida, they're known as the Chicos. And the Chicos normally rock together. It's not a racial offensive term or anything like that. That's just what they say in Florida. Like Sumter CI in the youth offender prisons, the Chicos were all together. So you had 13s, Brown Pride, and non-affiliates running under the same little whip, versus at Lancaster, you had 13s, you had Latin Kings, you had Latin King affiliates. Chicos like Chicos. It's a racial thing. They stick together in a certain sense. Lancaster, they did have their own presence. They were more secluded as their own organization versus just rocking with the Chicos in general. And when I went to Appalachia CI, my first adult prison, that is where they were basically their own group. They weren't tying flags or necessarily rocking with the Chicos, but they did most of their business amongst the Hispanics, the Latinos. They had 5 to 6 members on the prison compound, and they actually had their hands in a lot of different things. But from what I saw compared to Cali, they were not even physically the same. There was no mandatory workouts, mandatory rec. The whole militant politics within the West Coast, it doesn't slide like that down in Florida. And it's funny because we don't have segregation in the state of Florida. When I would see the Surenos and any of the other Mexicans that were out there that were non-affiliated, they would be playing soccer with the Dreads being the blacks that are from Jamaica, Haiti, grew up in the islands, still have that very strong accent, whether they speak Creole, Patois. They would all be on the rec yard together playing soccer. It would basically be the Mexicans versus the blacks. But that's how they were rocking. And other than that, they really didn't do any other intermingling with other races. It's not that our politics is segregated, but they somewhat segregated themselves. They were very closed off to other groups and other people. They didn't really let anyone in. And that's one of the things I respected the most about them, because they were one of the most drama-free groups that I got to witness within the Florida Department of Corrections. They weren't really in the bullshit or in the mix of things. And unless someone else's actions caused them to get involved, like if 2 people are fighting and they hit this dude's bunk, and when the police come, they search his bunk, he's a 13, he gets knocked off with something. Now they have pressure with whoever caused that altercation. But other than that, they weren't really getting into anything. Now, that doesn't mean they don't hold their own accountable. When I first got to Appalachia CI, there was a 13. He had a 1 and a 3 tattooed on his face. And they put something in his neck in the canteen line. And, the helicopter came. Dude denied the helicopter and was still talking shit. But they got him up out of there. They definitely hold their own accountable. And they are not going to play with you. The majority of them that I met, which is only a handful, it must have been less than 10, usually have murder charges or an insane amount of time. I was friends with one that was official. I was friends with another that wasn't official, but he was affiliated with them. If they went in, he went in. He was Mexican. I believe he was born in Mexico, but grew up in Florida. And he was going to rock for the cause. It is what it is. One of them that was tattooing at Appalachia CI was in there because he shot two Norteños, paralyzing one and killing the other. The one that I was closer to, the official member, he was in there for a murder. Another one that I was in class with, I believe he was more so affiliated, he was in there for a murder. And the one that I was cool with, that was in the same dorm, the same quad as me, he was in there for, I think, 15 or better. I forget the exact charge, but he had been shot a shitload of times his damn self, to the point that he actually had a pass that he didn't have to go through a metal detector because he still had bullets in his body. So when we wanted to bring a knife or a razor, anything like that onto the rec yard, we'd give it to him. He'd hide it, he'd put it wherever on his body, and we'd be able to get right through because he doesn't have to go through the metal detector due to the fact that he's got bullets. And I actually tattooed this kid in my cell. It was me and Bimba at the time. And I ran some ink on this kid. He was cool as shit. But if I didn't have those two friendships, I would literally know nothing about them because they closed themselves off. They literally needed nobody else within the prison system that I saw. At Appalachia specifically, they were doing their own thing. They had money coming in, and whichever way they handled that, I'm not going to get into that. But they were self-sufficient to the point they really didn't need to do business with any other race. And they only did so more so as a favor for that race. They would, do business with who they felt was solid, who they felt was respected to their liking. It wasn't about who anyone else respected. It's about if they respected them because they operated so differently. Hospitality with them is completely different. They take in their own, they feed their own, they clothe their own. They stand up for their own. It doesn't matter if you're old or young. If you're Mexican or you fall under the 13, they're going in about you. And it's very respectable how they carried themselves, how they treated their own. But in comparison to Western politics, I didn't see anything that really resembled the California prison system. From the segregation, aside from the fact that they somewhat separate themselves from everyone else, there's no mandatory workouts. They weren't out, doing burpees and shit. They were playing soccer or hanging out or smoking, whatever it was. There was one time where the head of the 13s actually approached me by himself while his brothers were playing soccer. Everyone knew who I was. Everyone knew what I was. And when he approached me, one of his brothers saw it, tapped the other one, and they ran up thinking that there was an issue because me and him was somewhat standing in front of each other with no one else around us. Rambo was probably 10 steps behind me talking to one of my brothers, but everyone else turned and saw what was, transpiring and thought that something was going to happen. They thought the eye was going to pop off. One of us was going to go at it with the other, whatever. And he was just passing on a message. He knew Bimba. He wanted me to tell Bimba something, Bimba being my bunkie. So he came up and it wasn't an issue, but his brothers walked up, my brothers walked up, and everyone was like, what's up, blah, blah. And we were just like, nah, we just, we just talking, it ain't nothing. And him being the head of that organization, he was actually originally from California, had the shit blasted all over him, tatted up. But he was a cool ass dude. You know what I mean? We had a few conversations. We kept it to the minimum because he wasn't who I was a friend of. He was just an associate of new people that I was associated with. So we would pass a message back and forth, or we would do business in one way or another. Now, one thing that they had on lock was the tattoo game. And the thing that was so fucking crazy about the tattoo game, right, is they had some of the best artists that I saw on the compound, but they didn't need money. They weren't tattooing for food. They weren't tattooing for anything other than the fact that they wanted to tattoo. And they only tattooed their own. And the tattoos that were coming out, from an artist perspective or for someone that appreciates art and tattoos, it was phenomenal. And that's one thing I also respect about their specific organization is they embrace their culture and they represent that shit to the fullest. They were getting Aztec style tattoos. That shit had me wanting to get a fucking Aztec warrior tatted on my back or something. The shit was just coming out awesome with the Aztec designs, the feathers, the swords, like the weapons that they used to have. It was fire. It was fire. And they only tattooed their own people. And being that one of my friends was official, he was getting ink done. And I'm like, bro, you got to get me in there with him. Like, I'm trying to get some work done. I got food. Da-da-da. He was like, I can see what's up, but there ain't no promises. They were literally just doing it for the simple fact that they could do it and they put on for themselves. And, you know, while all of them weren't completely covered in tattoos, more so how they are out west, they were blasting that shit in pretty, you know, bold places, whether it's their throat, their face, eyelids, their head. They were letting it be known. You know, you might see one of them take their shirt off on the yard, even though we're not allowed to have it off, but they'll pop it off just so you see this fucking 3 foot 1 and 3 on his chest and stomach. I mean, just gigantic tattoos letting you know what time it was, letting you know that they're here to put on regardless of the numbers. And that's exactly what they did. The numbers didn't mean anything within Florida. If they had an issue with you, they were going to get to you. One of the most vicious, nastiest guys I ever seen at Lancaster CI, a Mexican did that. I'm not sure if he was an official 13, but I know that he was Mexican for a fact. Now, he got into it with an X-Men, somebody from Orlando. Big-ass dude, must have been like 22, 23. And he looked like a grown man. Like, he's bald. He looked like a mechanic. Like one of those big-ass dudes that just work all day, right? And small Mexican kid jumped on his back with a pencil that had 2 razors on it and wet his whole, you know, the side of his face and the side of his head. The scar, because it was 2 close cuts, they couldn't stitch it up correctly. It didn't heal correctly. And the keloid came off of his face damn near 2 inches. It was a brutal scar. I believe his family sued the Florida Department of Corrections, and they were supposed to pay for the removal of that scar. It was nasty. It was brutal. And another thing is, the ones that I met, the Mexicans and the 13s that I met, were all small. Like, none of them were big. I didn't meet one of them that was over 6 feet. Not one of them. And the only fat people I knew inside of prison were either Mexican or Puerto Rican or Cuban. Because them motherfuckers, they had people sending that money and they were eating good and made sure that they ate good every single night. You know what I mean? So it's like they didn't have the same look as California where everyone's huge and jacked. But regardless of height, of weight, of any of that, they were some of the toughest people I met inside of prison. When it came to throwing hands, they didn't give up for nothing. You were lucky, though, to throw hands with them, because usually 9 times out of 9, they're just going to wet your ass up. Like, they're not even going to play. They're going to get a knife. They're going to get a sword. You know what time it is if you go through it with them. And nobody wanted to go through it with them. Nobody. That's just, everyone knows. Like, you go through it with them, either you or your people are going to get the shit stabbed out of them. It's a known fact. But if you see them fight, god damn. I mean, that's why they got so many Mexican boxers that are just, you know, tearing shit up, because they can fight and they're tough as shit. My homeboy that was the non-official but affiliated Mexican in the dorm, you know, we would throw hands with him. Me and Bimba, like, that was our dog. We would eat with him. I tattooed this kid. And then my other homeboy that I was in class with, he was an official 13. We would hang out. It would be nothing but good vibes. Like, every time we spoke, it was never dramatic, never problematic. We would just always have street vibes, turf vibes, meaning like we would be in prison, but the conversation would be about freedom, about society, and nothing but good times. We would laugh, we would joke around, we would hang out, you know. And in my experience, the few 13s that I met, they were very respectable with how they carried themselves, how they represented one another, and the way that they politic inside of the Florida Department of Corrections. It sets themselves aside from the other organizations within the prisons. Now, I'm definitely interested in doing an interview with either an active or a non-active Sureno from out west to really like break down these politics and hear the perspective of how they're rocking within Florida. You know, do you feel that it's watered down because they're not as militant with the workouts, with the segregation, or is politics just politics and whatever state can rock differently? You know, I wanted to share more personal stories with the specific people that I knew that were a part or affiliated with that organization. But from my understanding, they don't put their face on nothing at all. The only time you're going to see their face is if they put somebody in the news and they get arrested for it. Like, they're really just not out there in the cameras like that. And once again, that is another very respectable way of an organization to carry themselves. And I may be doing some more comparison videos in the future with certain organizations that are not native to Florida, that have migrated to Florida and become dominant within the Florida Department of Corrections. But let me know how y'all like this video. If you did like it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. More content coming soon, more interviews coming soon. But hey, it's 1090 Jake. I'm rocking with y'all, y'all rocking with me. Till next time.